Okay, so I hope you can hear me well. And we're going to continue today. We're going to continue and actually move on to, hopefully, to the next topic. We need to finish something that I don't want to develop today because I want to go over it after we finish the next topic. But at least we'll see because it's in the order. I don't know why in the order it came out this way. I seem to remember that it was a different order originally, but we'll do it anyway now. Somehow I got mixed up here, but. Okay. I want to read it and then from that we'll get into it. So it says here, what we talked about last time is that the whole process of conscious determination is really taking the future and bringing it into the present. I saw something very nice from the Rebbe over the last couple of days. A lot of times when you talk about bringing the future into the present, when the present is not ready really for the future yet, you can still bring it in. But then it's called taking a loan. So for instance, when you go to the bank and you ask them for a loan for, let's say, $1 million to build a then really what they're doing is they're giving you the future and the present, but the present still can't contain that building. It's still going to take time. Meaning, think about time the way that the philosophers think about it. That time is really a measure of actions taken. So if I take $1 million, that represents a building that will stand in a certain location at a certain point in the future. But I have that money in my hand right now, as it were. So I have the future in a certain sense in the present. But that's not the real future we're talking about, because the money is just like an intermediate between the present moment and the future. The real future is the building that's going to stand here after, let's say, 2 years of building. That's the real future. So when I'm holding the money in my hand, or I have it in my bank account, I've received the future, but I don't really have the future yet. I only have, as it were, let's call it the willpower or the strength to bring the future about. That's what I've been given. I've been given resources from the future, but I don't have the future itself. If somebody could loan me the building itself, that would be like taking the future and bringing it into the present. We don't suffer from this problem when we're talking about conscious determination because we're never talking really about a building. We're talking about seeing the goodness in reality come out. So the goodness is already there. It's just that it hasn't come out. So we don't have this issue that it's nowhere to be found. It is here. It's just impossible to see it. We'll get into this a little bit later when we discuss something about Mashiach. But I want to go back to this idea of a loan. When you take a loan, you're not bringing the actual future into the present. You're just taking the resources and bringing them into the present so that you can bring about the future, so that you can make the future happen. How do you say to take a loan in Hebrew? There's many words for it. One of them is very interesting, why this is a word that's used. But it's called lakachat, to take, behakafa. Behakafa means as a loan. The word is hey kuf pet hey, pei hey. Hey kuf pei hey. Hakafa. Now we know that we just spent a week and a half ago actually last Shabbos, 9 days ago, we spent the whole day doing hakafos. And a hakafa means alone. So what were we taking? We were taking the future, the good future. We were taking the resources to bring that good future about while we were doing the hakafos. Each hakafa is another loan from Hashem. It's not a loan of the future itself. It's a loan of the strength, the energy, the health, everything that's needed in order to bring the good future about. That's a very interesting concept that the Rebbe, I suddenly saw a sicha from him about this. That when you're doing a kafos, you should have this in mind, that you're preparing for the year to come. That every akafa is another loan. Another thing you're taking as a loan in order, like I would take a loan from a bank, in order to actually build something. So that's an intermediate state between conscious determination as something that creates reality, and a loan which also takes from the future, but it takes it in such a way that now you have to work. Conscious determination, really the whole concept of conscious determination is about bringing about something at this moment, not just in the future. So, why is that? Because conscious determination is really related entirely to Mashiach. Because the main thing that we have to use conscious determination for is for bringing the Mashiach, which really means, and again now getting into the distinction I made between a loan and between conscious determination, again the loan is only taking the resources from the future, but it's not the future itself. Meaning it's not enough to get the loan approved by the bank. I actually now have to go do something with the resources the bank has given me. We're talking about conscious determination. Really, the act of conscious determination is what brings the future itself into the present. Not just its resources. It's not just that then now I have to go and do something. It's that conscious determination is about bringing the future into the present. So, by analogy, it would be like that if I was going to build a building, the moment that I finish the process of conscious determination, the building itself is standing in its place. And it's not just that I have the resources to go and do it now. This is particularly relevant to the question of Mashiach. Because the question is, what do you mean? When you expect Mashiach, which is conscious, you're expecting a future outcome. What are we expecting? So the Rambam is very adamant that Mashiach can come any day. So if you're looking at a process like building a building, you can't do it by just willing it. You can't do it immediately. So Mashiach, the Geula, is not exactly like a building. It's not building something. Rather, it's a change in how we see reality. From this I can understand fully that Mashiach is something that has nothing to do with building one thing or another. You don't have the state of Israel in order to bring Mashiach. You don't have to build the base of Mikdash in order to bring Mashiach. Because these things, they take time. They're processes. The Mashiach is instantaneous. It can be any day. Why? Because it's a state of consciousness that changes. That's what's happening there. Like we said, you're revealing that reality is inherently good. And that change can happen in a moment. That's why it's in any day that he comes. It can happen on any day. It's not limited by having to go through some kind of process that would take time. So conscious determination at its core is something that happens right away. It happens today. So that's how we'll understand the next paragraph. The same is to be understood regarding the statement made by the Mashiach to Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi. When Rabbi Yehoshua asked him when he is coming, the Mashiach responded, today. Because it can be actually today, because it's just a change in your consciousness. The Mashiach doesn't have to do anything. He just has to change the way that people think. And that can be done instantaneously. And the change that he has in mind is to make people see the inherent goodness, the inherent godliness in reality. All this depends on the ability to firmly cling to the point of faith, expanding it into a picture and then drawing it down into the will, to the intellect, until it finally becomes physical sight, as explained. Okay. Now, when we are talking about bringing the future into the present, not as a loan, but as an actual reality. So this is hinted to in the Torah. The Torah has a very interesting mitzvah that we don't do. And we don't do it for good reason. But the Torah wants us to do it. And Moshe Rabbeinu taught us to do this. And when we continue further in the chapter, this is the final chapter, when we continue further, we'll see that this mitzvah was used in past generations. We'll see actual examples of people using this mitzvah. What is the mitzvah? Let's see. This is the matter revealed in the verse, you shall fear Havaya your God, you shall serve him. You shall cling to him, and you shall swear in his name. Et Havaya Elokecha tira, oto ta'avod, uvo titbak. And the most important thing for us, and you shall swear in his name. Vishmo tishaveh. This is a mitzvah that when you do make a vow, when you swear, it should be in the name of Hashem. Except that, interestingly enough, this is related to serving God, because it says, you shall fear God, you shall cling to him, and you shall serve him. So when you serve him and cling to him, it's understood that the way that you do this is through a vow, through swearing. You make a vow. Swearing in English also means to say something not so nice, so it kind of lost that meaning. But in Hebrew it's to swear, literally. Or, like we would say in more formal English, to make a vow. What does a vow do? A vow is like saying, I now in the present am now saying something about the future. Let's say I make a vow to do so and so in the future. So it's like I've taken the future and I brought it into the present. Why do I make the vow? The vow is actually a type of transference of energy from the future into the present. That's the purpose of the vow. Clinging to God is in thought. So clinging to God here, uvot tidbak, is like the thought clinging to what? An aspect which is bina, referred to as the world to come and the future to come. So when I think about the future, that's clinging to God. Because like we said, clinging to Hashem right now is a little bit difficult because Hashem is not revealed. But in the future, Hashem will be revealed. So what am I really clinging to? I'm clinging to Hashem, how Hashem is going to be revealed in the future. In the psyche, this refers to the inner aspect of understanding, being the inner aspect of the Partzuf Vatik, means the inner aspect of the unknowable head, the source of faith in the psyche. So to cling is really to believe. That's the idea here. Dveikus. When somebody says dveikus, what's the difference between faith and dveikus? that dveikut, uvotidbak, you should cling to him, is more than faith, because faith is just having an awareness of the future, but clinging is to attach myself to the future and to be able to be a bridge to bring the future into the present. So that's the first part, uvotidbak. To swear, to make a vow in Hebrew, stems from the same word as the number 7, sheva. The swearing in God's name, or making a vow in God's name, alludes to the act of drawing faith down into the 7 lower sfirot. So really, when we make a vow, in Hebrew, the meaning is to bring Hashem down, to bring faith down into the 7 lower sfirot, especially to their shell, giving them a strong and steadfast nature in the heart. To say it in other words, that vows are meant to strengthen the heart, so that it's not just faith that I have, it's not just that I cling. When I make a vow, I take that attachment that I have to the future, I take that attachment that I have to faith, and I transform it into something that strengthens, that lines like I would line something, make it thicker. It lines the chambers of the heart, the chambers of the emotive faculties. It makes them more and more powerful, strong, so that they can withstand the difficulty of this world. That's what the vow does. It strengthens the midos. It strengthens the 7 properties of the emotional attributes. Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, all the way down to Malchus. When do I do this? When I have a state in which I'm doubtful. When I have doubt, I bring faith down. So really, conscious determination is a process of overcoming doubts. What kind of doubts that I have, because I'm not sure that I can successfully bring about what I believe in. So I have to take the faith and bring it down into my motive faculties, making my motive faculties stronger, and having bitachon, having confidence that I can fulfill that which I have faith in. That's the nature of a vow. That's what the vow is meant for. That's why it's a mitzvah. When should you make a vow? Say Chazal, say the sages. When you have a difficult situation with a mitzvah, there's a mitzvah that you're not sure that you have the strength to do, so you make a vow. For instance, I'll give an example. A person wants to give tzedakah, but he knows that if he starts thinking about it, then he'll have a feeling that he doesn't have enough money in order to give the tzedakah. So he must do something. How does he do it? He does it by making a vow. It can be a neder, like a neder, but it's really a shvu'ah. It's really called a shvu'ah. Shvu'ah means I vow to do so and so. And making that shvu'ah, making that vow, gives you the power, the strength to carry it through. Meaning it's a commitment. But how did it work? It worked by me taking the picture of the good future that I have in my mind and bringing it down into my faculties so that I can act upon that vision, that I can act upon that picture that I have of what the future. Sorry about that. But I see that it fixed the internet at least. Okay? So it takes faith and it brings it down into the 7 lower sefirot. That's the purpose of a vow. And you do it specifically in regard to a mitzvah. A mitzvah that you're afraid that you won't be able to carry out, to perform. And therefore you strengthen yourself by taking the vow. To truly sweeten the natural state of the 7 lower sefirot, the emotional and habitual powers of the psyche, the source for this drawing down must come from the so-called 8th firmament, the 8th that is higher than the 7th. In that sense, we're now entering the 8th month of the year, the month of Cheshvan, and we see that the month of Cheshvan is the month of rain. The month of rain in which we bring down everything that we actually worked on during the 7th month. The 7th month was all in our powers. We did this, we did what we did in the month of Tishrei through our own strength, through our own doing. And then suddenly comes the 8th month and it doesn't have a single holiday. And what's the idea? The idea is that there's nothing here that's coming from below. Everything will come from above. That's why in Chassidus, it's explained that the 8th month is the month in which the Beis HaMikdash, the temple, will come down from Shemayim. Doesn't mean that we won't do anything, but it means that that part that needs to come down from Hashem will come down in the 8th month, in the month of Cheshvan. The first Beis HaMikdash was inaugurated on Tishrei. And that makes a lot of sense because it was entirely from below to above. The second Beis HaMikdash was inaugurated, according to a lot of sources, in Kislev. It was inaugurated really by the Chashmonaim during the time of Hanukkah, because there was no orderly inauguration when they first came back from Babylon. And so the month in the middle that's left is Cheshvan. They're all the months of Rachel, Rachel's children. Ephraim was Tishrei, Kislev is Binyamin, and Cheshvan that we're starting today, it should be a good month and a healthy month for everybody, is the month of Menashe. And Menashe himself, even his name means neshama. It's like the neshama that comes down from above. So the neshama and the Beis HaMikdash and all these things, they come down from the 8th firmament. The 8th that is higher than the 7th, as discussed already earlier, in respect to circumcision, which is done on the 8th day. The same thing as circumcision. So really, circumcision is itself a form of making a vow. And when you have a vow, you also make a sign that you made the vow. You have to keep a sign. And the sign is like the circumcision. This explains why the Hebrew word swearing, making a vow, or taking an oath, is always passive, because it is affected and satiated by the essence of the I that is above the 7. What he means to say here is that the 8th firmament, that's the I that's above the 7. Meaning, normally a person identifies themselves with their emotions, with their lower continents, with their lower faculties. And the faculties, like, that's how all of us almost all of us point. When we say I, we point here. That's already, we point to our chest. That's already the lower faculties. I've never seen really anybody say I and go like this. Even though I think that for most people, when asked where in your body, so they would say, I'm somewhere here. I'm somewhere in between my eyes, or a little bit on top. But we don't say I. Nobody does, at least I've never seen anybody. We've talked about this in the past. We all say I. We point to our chest. But to make a vow, you're actually calling down from your higher self into the lower faculties. And that's what it means to swear, to make a vow, is really to affect and influence the lower faculties. Okay? So we will come back to this topic, not now, but after we finish the whole story with Yiftach. But that will be in a while. Okay. What we want to continue with, here, there's one more paragraph, so let's read it. In our present reality, God's name cannot be pronounced as it is written. So we don't make vows in God's name. We make vows. People make vows. For instance, they make to give tzedakah or something like that. But we don't really make vows. We don't use this technique so much. It's a little bit of a shame. Really, it's a shame that we don't use it as much, because it's almost like in today's world, people are afraid to make plans. When you make a plan and you decide that it's as if you're making a vow that I will do this tomorrow, that's a strong commitment. It's almost like people are afraid to make commitments in that sense. You should make commitments. If it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But from our point of view, the whole idea is that we need to make these vows in order to do the maximum and get the maximum out of our lives. Again, we don't make vows in God's name, but the way that it's said in the Torah, it was supposed to be in God's name Himself. We learn this from the fact that we don't use God's name for anything. Yud Kei Vav Kei, we don't use it for anything. We don't even say it when we read the Torah. So from that it was learned that since it says Uvishmoti Shaveh, you should make a vow in His name. So people learn from that it's not a good idea to make in general. But you can make a vow. You can make a vow even if you don't use God's name. And a vow is a strong commitment. If you have a diary, I hope you can hear me. It looks like Dina is having trouble hearing, or I'm not sure what the issue is, but you're having trouble hearing. Does this make it any better? Just a second, somebody is bothering me here. When you make a vow, you can sort of do it like with a diary. You can write it every day what you're going to do tomorrow. And next to it says bandwidth is low. I don't know. Yeah, my internet reception is always terrible here. Okay, I hope they can still hear it. You can write in your diary what you're going to do tomorrow, and you can sign next to it. Use your name. It's like with a campaign commercial. I'm Moshe Ganuth, and I approve this message. This is me, and I approve that this is what I want to do tomorrow. That this is what I want to be able to achieve tomorrow. So I don't have to sign in Hashem's name, but I make it a strong commitment. But the commandment is indeed to swear using God's name. It's to use the vow using God's name, to give it the most commitment, the most impact that I can, that I possibly can. And I do that by, according to the Torah, by using Hashem's name as it is pronounced, indicating that the act of swearing or making a vow draws down from the future, when God's name will be pronounced as it is written, into the present today. In the future, it says that God's name will be pronounced the way that it's written. Yud Kei Vav Kei, Mamish. Not like we say Adni. So from that, there's another direction that we're anticipating the future by making a vow. It is then as if the Mashiach indeed swore to Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi that he would come today. It wasn't just a statement, it was a vow. I will come today. And as we said, that's how the Rambam learned this. Then in the end, Mashiach can come today because it's a commitment, it's a strong commitment to making it so that the future in which the goodness of reality will be revealed today. Actually today. Okay. So the central act of pulling the future into the present, just described, occurs between the unknowable head, like we said, the faith, the air that surrounds the head, that we said that's where there's like a fire there, and the forehead of will. This movement parallels the secret of the size of a large fist. This is the fist of Ben Batiach, discussed in the Mishnah relating to the size of a natural opening, a non-man-made opening, considered large enough to allow a spirit of defilement to pass through it. Now we're getting to something that's almost, it's as close as you can get to fantasy in Torah. And that's all the laws of defilement, of tumah, something being tameh. What's the idea? The idea is that tumah is something that travels in the world. It propagates. To propagate, it has to have certain conditions. One of the conditions, for instance, is that tumah cannot propagate in the natural world. Meaning, a tree can never be defiled. The tree growing up in my garden is always tahor. It's always pure. Why is that? Because it's nature. Nature is always fine. What becomes tameh, what carries and can have defilement, that is man-made objects in general. Or certain materials, for instance, anything that's made out of metal. So it could be man-made. And since we don't have metal usually in nature, so everything would be man-made. But theoretically, if I'm not mistaken, even if it wasn't man-made, it was a natural piece of metal, it would still conduct defilement. So what did they do to stop defilement, for instance? So they made a lot of their vessels out of stone. Because stone, even when man-made, doesn't carry defilement. So there's all kinds of very complex and intricate conditions with tumah and how it's transported, how it's conducted. One of these has to do with openings between rooms. So for instance, if one room has something that has defilement, and it's defilement that can pass through the air. What type of defilement passes through the air? It won't make the air impure, but it can pass through it. It's like conducted through the air. If something is the highest level of tumah, for instance, if there's a body in the room, and now you open, there's a natural opening in the. It's not a doorway. It wasn't made that way. It's just that there's a natural opening. For instance, when you built it, you left something open. You didn't cut it out. You didn't cut out a window or a doorway. It was just how you built it. You built it with an opening there. Or, let's say, it was very common to do this, you built your house in a cave. And the cave has a natural opening. It becomes a question, how big does an opening have to be for defilement to pass through it? What's the minimum size? The answer that the Mishnah gives is that it's the fist size of a man whose name was Ben Batiach. So his fist was so big, really they say that in the end it was the size of a head. His fist was so big that it was as big as a normal head. It's called the Grofo shel Ben Batiach. Now, even though this is talking about defilement, from it we learn how the future comes down into the present. When the future is coming down into the present, there has to be an opening to allow it through. The question is, how big is this opening? First of all, the future is huge. How big is it? The future is infinite. How much of the future can fit into the present? More specifically, how much of the future energy that there is in the future, how much of that energy can come down into our will, from the faith into our will? How much willpower? Because my willpower is limited. It's not like the future. So how much of it? As much as can pass through that window-sized opening that's called the fist of Ben Batiach. It sounds really fantastic, this whole thing. Even to think that there is anybody tried to actually describe this. So obviously we're not talking about quantity. We're not talking about quantities per se. We're talking about something else. How much of the future, and the future is infinite, can I bring down into my willpower? It's because, for instance, if I now want to grab everything that will be in the future, so my willpower is not big enough. No matter what I'll do, I'll come up short. And I'll be frustrated because I can't transfer such a big vision into my willpower. I just can't do it. So what can I do? How much can I expect to be able to transform from faith into will? As the size of the head. The size of the head. That's really the size of the fist of Ben Batiach. Now this itself needs a lot of meditation. What is this talking about? So first of all, before we continue with this, I want to see something parallel that's similar to it. It's not exactly the same, but it's very close, and you'll begin to see where we're going with this. The thing that's similar to this is what we call, and we say this every morning every Shabbos in our prayers, we have this idea that there are windows to the heavens. The heavens have windows. What does it mean that they have windows? The astronomical meaning is that each one of the windows of the heavens, or of the firmament really, it's called Chalonei Rakia, the windows in that window is where the sun shines, where it rises every day. Okay? Every day that the sun rises, it rises in a different place. It's a little bit different. It goes from the east towards the south, and when it reaches the shortest day in the year, it's in its southernmost window, and then it'll slowly shift back to the north. It'll go closer to the east. That's how the sun. Each one of the days, it takes 180 days to get to the shortest day of the year, and then 180 days to come back to the longest day of the year. So there's altogether, the way it's understood is that there's 180 windows in the firmament where the sun shines. And the understanding is that each one of these windows affects the world in a different way. Each one of the windows, somebody wanted to say something? Sorry. Was somebody trying to ask a question? If not, we'll just continue. What does it mean? It means that every day when you get up, Hashem is shining down on the world willpower. There's a famous statement that the Rebbe made many times, that in the summer, it's much easier to serve Hashem. Why? Because there's a lot more willpower. Why is there a lot more willpower? Because the sun is shining for many more hours than it is in the winter. The more hours of sunshine you have, again, it's a symbol for having more willpower. Each one of the windows is the sun giving us will, giving us strength to do things. And each one of these windows has a different purpose. So as you go through the whole cycle of the year, 360 days, really what you're discovering is that each one of the days has its own, call it resources, power of will that it can give the inhabitants of the earth. So these are called the windows of the heavens, the windows of the firmament. The fact that it's also called a window, and this is the same name that opening between two rooms is called. It's called a chalon. It's called a window that allows the defilement to pass from one room to the other. And again, that window has to be the size of a human head, at least a human head. What that means is, it gives us a hint that defilement and willpower function actually the same way. Where do we see this in Chassidus? So this is the famous explanation of the Baal Shem Tov about the Para Aduma, about the red heifer. The red heifer is a symbol for willpower. And he says, it defiles the pure and it purifies the defiled. The energy in the red heifer, if you're defiled, meaning if you have no willpower and you just woke up and you say, the world doesn't depend on me, what does it matter what I do? So having a little bit of self-pride is good. Because what will that do? It'll give you the willpower to get out of bed and go do something because everything depends on you. So it purifies the defiled. But if you hold on to that self-aggrandizement through the action, and when you finish you feel, I did something important, it defiles the pure. Now that you've done something, you're pure. And by hanging on to that willpower and saying it was me who did it, you defile yourself. So we see that these two concepts, willpower and defilement, are very related to one another. When a person feels that he has no willpower, we would say in Torah that he is tamei. It's as if he's defiled. Because someone who has willpower is somebody who's pure. So they're very much related to one another. They function almost the same way. So from these laws of defilement, we can understand how willpower comes down. But the takeaway message, and with this we'll end today, is that not everything that you have faith in, you can have willpower to do. Because the extent of the willpower depends on the size of your head. If you have a big head, then you can bring down more willpower. If you have a little head, you can bring down less willpower. What does it mean to have a head like this or like that? The meaning is obviously, as we said, it's not just about the head inside. We're not yet talking about the intellect, the mind, the third stage. We're talking about just the forehead. The forehead is the gulgolet. The forehead is the skull. And the skull, as we said, that's the mochastima, that's the concealed mind, the concealed wisdom. The more you have nullification and you can tap into your concealed wisdom, and it comes down drop by drop and so on, and all these things that we talked about so many times, the more can be transformed into the concealed mind, the more you can have willpower. But you have to have this nullification in order to be able to bring the crown, here the crown is the willpower, or the faith, into the crown, to work with the crown in the first place. And this is very difficult because again, you need to have nullification. Without nullification, you can't tap into this at all. So next time, God willing, we'll read a little bit more to begin to understand what needs to happen in the willpower to increase the size of the concealed mind, so that more of the faith can come down and find its place in the willpower. So that's going to be our topic. Okay?
Great. Looking forward.
Thank you. It was a great class.
I say so. Doesn't have to be great. You just have to understand it.
It opens up a lot of.
Okay.
Opens up. I look forward to listening to it again because I never really get it the first time.
I'll put it up on the.
So I hope.
I'll put it up later.
Thank you.
Good to see everybody. Have a good Chodesh
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
and a healthy winter.
Thank you so much. Chodesh Tov, everyone.
Chodesh Tov.
Chodesh
Chodesh
Tov.
Tov.
Bye.